Mother is trying to spread awareness after her son died because of a game he saw on YouTube. Carson choked himself, was rushed to the hospital. Doctors could not save him. The online challenge is where kids are choking themselves or others just before the point of passing out to feel a high. Tia Bodkins believes her 11-year-old son would still be alive if she'd known such a challenge even existed.
I 100% know that if I would have seen this on the news, I would have put together those warning signs and I would have had a conversation with him about it.
These are 5th and 6th graders. After the tragedy, Carson's school in Colorado emailed parents a list of resources to spot warning signs their kids might be trying this game. They include headaches and having bloodshot eyes.